I'm Evelyn, and 3 weeks ago, my life broke apart. I stood on the front porch of the house where I grew up, clutching my old brass key. The sun was setting behind the tall oak trees, painting everything in soft gold. I tried the lock once then, again my hands trembling. The key didn't turn. My heart started to pound. I pulled out my phone thinking maybe this was a mistake, something simple I could fix. That's when I saw the text from my sister Veronica. 4 short sentences glowed on the screen. You are no longer part of this family. The locks have been changed. Don't come back. Collect your things on Saturday. I read it twice. My chest felt hollow. I pressed my palm against the door, hoping it would open anyway, but it stayed shut, and the silence inside felt colder than winter. My breath came in shallow bursts as I stepped back from the door. For a moment, I thought I might collapse right there on the porch. I looked around the yard that once felt safe, the place I had played with chalk and watched fireflies in summer. Now it seemed like someone else's home. I tried calling Veronica. Straight to voicemail. I called my mother, Margaret. No answer. My father, Walter. Nothing but a hollow ring that cut off after 4 tries. I sank onto the top step, clutching my phone against my chest. A memory slipped in Grandma Agnes standing right here telling me, "This house is yours as much as anyone's." But her voice was gone, replaced by the cold truth. I was locked out alone, and the people I loved most didn't care enough to even pick up the phone. I don't remember how long I sat there. Maybe minutes, maybe an hour. The sky turned from gold to deep blue. Porch lights flickered on in the neighbors' yards. No one looked my way. My fingers were numb when I finally stood up. I knocked on the door, gentle at first, then harder. "Veronica, please," I called, my voice cracking. "Just talk to me." No reply. I moved to the side door by the garage and tried that lock. It was changed too. I felt something break inside me, Zoom. I pressed my forehead to the cold wood. "I'm still your sister," I whispered. The night answered back with nothing but the sound of wind moving through the trees. I walked around to the back porch, hoping for some sign of compassion. The kitchen window glowed softly, curtains pulled halfway open. For a second, I thought I saw movement, Veronica's silhouette crossing the tile floor. I raised my hand, ready to knock on the glass, but I froze. My heart thumped so loud it hurt. She knew I was out here. She just didn't care. Slowly, I lowered my hand. My throat tightened with a mix of shame and disbelief. I never thought my own sister could be this cruel. I turned away from the window. The grass was damp under my shoes. Each step back to the driveway felt heavier than the last. The place I once called home had shut me out without a single word to my face. I walked around to the back porch, hoping for some sign of compassion. The kitchen window glowed softly, curtains pulled halfway open. For a second, I thought I saw movement, Veronica's silhouette crossing the tile floor. I raised my hand, ready to knock on the glass, but I froze. My heart thumped so loud it hurt. She knew I was out here. She just didn't care. Slowly, I lowered my hand. My throat tightened with a mix of shame and disbelief. I never thought my own sister could be this cruel. I turned away from the window. The grass was damp under my shoes. Each step back to the driveway felt heavier than the last. The place I once called home had shut me out without a single word to my face. In the driveway, I leaned against my car, gripping the door handle to steady myself. The night air smelled like damp earth and fading roses. I stared at the house, every window dark except the kitchen where Veronica moved like nothing had happened. I unlocked the car and sat behind the wheel. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I pulled my phone up again, hoping somehow she'd change her mind, but the text was still there, cold and final. "Don't come back." I thought about Grandma Agnes, how she'd hugged me in this very driveway when I left for college. She'd said, "They'll never understand your heart, but don't let them crush it." Now her voice felt like the only warmth I had left. I knew I couldn't stay parked there forever. My gas tank was almost empty, and the motel I'd checked into last night was 20 minutes away. But driving off felt like surrender, like admitting this was really happening. I looked at the front door one last time. My suitcase was still inside, my clothes, my sketchbooks, the little bits of my life I'd fought to protect, all locked behind those walls. A lump rose in my throat as I started the engine. Headlights washed over the porch, casting long shadows across the siding. For a moment, I almost expected someone to open the door and call my name, but no one did. I backed out of the driveway, tears blurring the road ahead. The drive to the motel felt endless, every mile stretched out like a question I couldn't answer. How did it come to this? How did love turn so easily into exile? When I pulled into the cracked parking lot, I sat in the car with the engine running. My hands were still trembling on the steering wheel. I couldn't make myself move. Finally, I turned off the ignition. The silence was too big, pressing in on all sides. I thought of calling someone, an old friend, a neighbor, but shame stopped me. I'd always believed family was supposed to be your shelter when everything else fell apart. Now all I had was this cheap room and the echo of my sister's rejection. Inside the motel room, I dropped my purse on the chipped dresser. The walls were painted a dull beige that made the air feel heavy. A single lamp cast a weak circle of light over the sagging bed. I sat on the edge of the mattress, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. My phone battery was nearly dead. I plugged it in and stared at the screen, waiting for it to light up again. No messages, no missed calls. Just that same text from Veronica. You are no longer part of this family. I read it again as if repetition could make it hurt less, but each word felt like a blade. I lay back on the bed, too tired to cry anymore. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of voices in the hallway. For a moment, I thought I was back home, that all of this had been a bad dream. But when I opened my eyes, the cracked ceiling and yellowed curtains reminded me where I was. My heart sank all over again. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. The screen glowed with the time, 12:42 a.m. Still nothing from my family. I thought of Grandma Agnes, her soft voice telling me stories about the dresses she used to sew. She'd believed in me when no one else did. I pressed the phone to my chest, wishing she were here to tell me what to do. But the only answer was the muffled laughter drifting through the thin walls. Morning came slow and gray. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, feeling the stiffness in my neck. My thoughts were tangled heavy with all the things I couldn't change. I checked my phone again. Nothing. Not even a single word from my parents. It was like I'd been erased overnight. I opened my email, desperate for any distraction. That's when I saw it, a message from a small fashion studio I'd applied 2 weeks ago. My heart kicked hard in my chest. They wanted to meet, an interview. It wasn't much, but it was something. A tiny spark in all this darkness. I took a deep breath, feeling a fragile thread of hope winding through the hurt. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, studying my reflection. My eyes were swollen, my hair limp from a night of restless sleep. But I had an interview to get to. I pulled my best blazer from the suitcase I'd packed before everything fell apart. It was wrinkled, but it would have to do. I smoothed it over my shoulders, trying to look composed. As I gathered my portfolio, I paused. My sketchbooks, most of them, were still locked inside that house. All the work I'd poured my heart into. I closed my eyes for a moment. You are more than what they took from you, I whispered to myself. I picked up my bag and walked out, determined not to let their cruelty be the end of my story. The drive to the studio felt unreal, like I was floating above my own life. My hands tightened around the steering wheel as I rehearsed what I'd say. When I pulled into the small parking lot, I forced myself to breathe. This was my chance to start over, even if everything else was crumbling. I checked my phone one last time. Still no calls, no apology, nothing. A hollow ache settled in my chest, but I pushed it aside. Inside the studio smelled of fresh fabric and coffee. The hiring manager greeted me with a kind smile. For the first time in days, I felt seen, even if only as a stranger trying to build something new. The interview lasted less than an hour, but it felt like a lifeline. The manager flipped through my portfolio, nodding slowly. You have a clear vision, she said. I can tell you care about your work. Her words warmed something in me I thought had frozen. When I stepped back into the parking lot, I let myself hope just a little. I sat in the car with the engine off, staring at the studio door. For once, I didn't feel like a burden or a disappointment. I felt like someone with a purpose. But as I pulled away, that hope tangled with dread. I still had to go back to the house. My things were there, and a part of me still needed to understand how my family could shut me out so easily. The drive back to the house was quiet, each mile sharpening the dread in my stomach. I rehearsed what I'd say if someone answered the door. Maybe if I stayed calm, they'd listen. When I turned onto the street, everything looked exactly the same. The front porch, the trimmed hedges, the tall oaks casting long shadows across the lawn. I parked at the curb and sat there, gripping the steering wheel. My heart thudded against my ribs, heavy and uncertain. Slowly, I got out and walked up the path. I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling. But before I even tried the key, I knew nothing had changed. This house didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a place that had decided to forget me. I stood there for a long moment, listening for any sound inside. A voice, a footstep, anything to prove someone cared I'd come back. Nothing. Just the hush of late afternoon, the wind stirring the branches overhead. I tried the key again, though I already knew it wouldn't turn. The metal scraped uselessly against the lock. My chest tightened. I pressed the doorbell, then knocked with the side of my fist. "Veronica, Mom, please just open the door." Silence. I stepped back, feeling a hollowness I'd never known. It was one thing to be unwanted. It was another to stand on the threshold of your own childhood and realize you no longer belonged. I walked around to the side door by the garage, hoping maybe this lock hadn't been changed. The handle was cold under my palm. I turned it slowly, praying for even the smallest mercy. Nothing. The door stayed shut, solid and unmoved. My throat burned as I swallowed back a sob. I tried calling Veronica again, even though I knew she wouldn't answer. Straight to voicemail. I pressed my forehead to the door, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. My family had made their choice clear. I wasn't just locked out. I was erased. And no matter how many times I knocked, no one was coming to let me back inside. I walked back to my car, every step slow and heavy. My hands felt numb as I opened the door and sank into the seat. For a moment, I couldn't even start the engine. I stared at the house through the windshield. My suitcase was in there, my clothes, my sketches, pieces of a life I'd fought to build. I thought about Grandma Agnes, how she'd always said, "Home isn't walls, it's the people who open the door when you knock." But the door had stayed shut. I rested my head against the steering wheel. A dull ache settled behind my eyes. No matter how much I wanted to pretend this was a misunderstanding, the truth was plain. They had decided I didn't matter. At some point, I lifted my head and wiped my eyes. I couldn't sit there forever waiting for people who wouldn't come. I started the car and pulled away from the curb. The house grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared behind the trees. Back at the motel, the room felt even colder than before. I set my bag on the floor and sank onto the bed. My phone buzzed in my pocket. For a split second, I hoped it was a message saying this was all a mistake. But it wasn't. Just a reminder about my next job application. I lay back and stared at the ceiling, the silence pressing down like a weight. In that moment, I knew I couldn't wait for them to change their minds. The next morning, I woke to pale light slipping through the curtains. My eyes were swollen, my head heavy with everything I couldn't fix. I sat up slowly, rubbing my arms to chase away the chill. My phone rested on the nightstand, dark and silent. I thought of calling Veronica one more time, but the memory of her message stopped me. "You are no longer part of this family." I forced myself to get dressed. I had an interview to follow up on, a chance to step forward even if it was only by an inch. As I gathered my things, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I looked tired, older somehow, but there was something steadier in my face too, like a part of me was done begging for their acceptance. I drove to a small cafe near the studio, needing coffee and a moment to clear my head. The place was quiet, just the clink of cups and the low hum of conversation. I found a corner table and opened my laptop. My hand shook as I typed a follow-up email about the interview. When I hit send, I closed my eyes and breathed out slowly. For the first time in days, I felt like I'd done something that belonged to me alone. I sipped my coffee, staring out the window at people walking by. They all looked like they had somewhere to belong, someone waiting for them. A pang went through me, sharp and sudden, but under it a small voice whispered, "You're still here. You're still trying." When I finished my coffee, I sat there a while longer, letting the warmth settle into my hands. Outside, the morning was bright, as if the world hadn't noticed everything that had fallen apart for me. I opened my email again, hoping for any word from the studio. Nothing yet. I scrolled past the message from Veronica, still sitting in my inbox like a bruise I couldn't stop pressing. My finger hovered over it, wanting to delete it, but I couldn't. Not yet. Finally, I closed the laptop and stood up. I had no plan, no place that felt like home. But I had a car, a small stack of resumes, and a part of me that refused to quit. It wasn't much, but maybe it was enough for today. I walked back to my car with the sun warm on my shoulders. For a few steps, I almost felt steady again. But as soon as I sat behind the wheel, the weight of everything came rushing back. I thought about the boxes of my things waiting in that house. Veronica's message had said I could pick them up on Saturday. Part of me wanted to go right then to stand on that porch until someone had to face me. But I knew they wouldn't open the door. I started the engine and pulled onto the road. I didn't know where I was going yet, just away from the ache of that driveway. The farther I drove, the clearer it became if I wanted a life worth anything, I would have to build it without them. I spent the rest of the afternoon driving aimlessly, past old neighborhoods and quiet streets lined with oaks. Each turn felt like peeling away another layer of what I used to believe about family. By dusk, I parked near the river and watched the water move in slow ripples. My chest felt hollow, but calmer than before. I thought about Grandma Agnes again. How she'd never cared that I didn't fit the mold Veronica loved so much. Your heart is your own, she'd told me once, her hands soft around mine. No one gets to tell you it's not enough. As the sky faded to indigo, I made a silent promise. I would not let their rejection be the final word on who I was. When night settled over the river, I finally drove back to the motel. The parking lot was almost empty, just a few cars under the flickering lights. In the room, I set my bag on the chair and sank onto the bed. My body felt heavy, but my mind wouldn't rest. I picked up my phone and opened my bank app. My stomach dropped when I saw the balance, almost nothing left. Rent for this week would drain what little remained. I scrolled through old texts with Grandma Agnes, her words like small lanterns in the dark. You have more courage than you know. Tears blurred the screen, but I held it close. Even if everything else was gone, I still had her faith in me. Morning came with a dull ache behind my eyes. I hadn't really slept, just drifted in and out of memories and worry. I got dressed slowly, each movement feeling heavier than it should. My phone buzzed with a notification. For a second, my heart jumped, hoping it was the studio. But it wasn't. It was an automated reminder about the shared account I'd once set up with Veronica. I logged in just to see, though. I already knew. The account was empty. All the money I'd saved drained without a single word to me. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands cold. It wasn't just the locks or the silence. They'd taken everything they could. And still, some part of me couldn't stop hoping for an apology that would never come. I knew I couldn't stay in that room much longer. My rent was due tomorrow, and there was no money left to cover it. I packed my bag in slow, careful motions, folding each shirt as if order might make the fear feel smaller. When I zipped it shut, my hands were trembling. I sat for a moment staring at the thin curtains. I had nowhere to go, no one to call. Then I remembered the email from the law office. The subject line had mentioned Grandma Agnes's trust. At the time, I'd been too overwhelmed to read past the first sentence. My thumb hovered over the message. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was the one thing that could still help me. I took a shaky breath and opened it. The email was brief, but clear. The trust set up by Grandma Agnes required my immediate attention. There was a phone number for Robert Ellis, the attorney handling her estate. I read the message twice, my pulse picking up. I'd always assumed any inheritance went straight to my parents. No one had ever said otherwise. I copied the number into my contacts and stared at it, feeling something shift inside me. A small flicker of hope. I pressed call before I could lose my nerve. The line rang 3 times before a calm voice answered. Robert Ellis speaking. My voice came out thin. This is Evelyn Hayes. You sent me an email about my grandmother's trust. There was a pause, then his tone softened. Thank you for calling, Ms. Hayes. I believe we need to meet in person. There are some things you deserve to know. I wrote down the address he gave me, my hand unsteady. His office was downtown in a building I'd driven past 100 times but never noticed. When I hung up, I sat staring at my phone. Part of me wanted to believe this was the moment everything would start to make sense. But another part, the tired part, whispered not to get my hopes up. Still, I couldn't ignore the feeling that Grandma Agnes had left something behind for me. A final way to say she saw me even when no one else did. I picked up my bag and walked out to the car. The morning air was crisp, full of traffic sounds and the scent of wet pavement. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was moving towards something instead of away. The law office was in a tall glass building that seemed too polished for someone like me, rumpled and exhausted. I took the elevator to the 10th floor, gripping my bag like a shield. The receptionist greeted me kindly and led me to a conference room with big windows overlooking the city. I sat down, my heart thumping so loud I wondered if she could hear it. A few minutes later, Robert Ellis walked in. He was older than I expected, with silver hair and steady eyes that didn't look away when he shook my hand. "Ms. Hayes," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "I know this has been a difficult time." I nodded, unable to find any words. He opened a thick folder and glanced at me gently. "Your grandmother made very specific plans for you, and it's time you understood them." I leaned forward, every muscle tense. Robert slid a document across the table. My name was printed clearly at the top. "This is the trust your grandmother created," he said. "She wanted to ensure you always had a place to call home." My eyes skimmed the lines, trying to process what I was seeing. The house, the one Veronica locked me out of, was listed as part of the trust. "It does not belong solely to your parents or your sister," he continued. "Your grandmother's wishes were that you could live there any time you needed." I swallowed hard, my hands tightening on the paper. All this time, they'd acted like it was theirs alone. Robert looked at me with quiet certainty. "What happened to you was not only wrong, it violated this trust." Something in me steadied. For the first time since that door closed, I felt like maybe I wasn't powerless after all. Robert turned another page and set a small stack of statements in front of me. Each line showed withdrawals from the trust's account. "These funds were designated for your creative pursuits," he said evenly. "Fashion design specifically." My chest tightened as I scanned the numbers. Tens of thousands spent on renovations, luxury appliances, things that had nothing to do with me. "Your sister and parents as trustees were legally required to inform you," Robert continued. "They did not." My throat went dry. "They used it without telling me?" He nodded once. "Yes. It's a serious breach." I closed my eyes for a moment. Rage and relief tangled in my ribs. Grandma Agnes hadn't forgotten me. She'd tried to protect me in the only way she could, and now I had proof that everything they'd done was more than cruel, it was theft. When I opened my eyes, Robert was watching me closely, as if he knew exactly how heavy this was. He reached into the folder one last time and pulled out a sealed envelope. "Your grandmother left this letter for you," he said, his voice soft. My hands trembled as I took it. The paper felt heavier than it should, like it was carrying all the words I'd needed to hear. I broke the seal carefully. Inside was her familiar handwriting, steady even at the end. "My dearest Evelyn, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong. I'm so sorry. I always knew your heart was brave and I never wanted you to feel alone. This trust is my way of making sure you have a foundation, no matter what others try to take." Tears blurred the ink, but I kept reading, holding each sentence like an anchor. "You have always seen the world differently," the letter went on, "and that is your greatest gift. Never let anyone make you believe it's a weakness." I pressed the page to my chest, feeling her love reach across all the years she'd been gone. Robert waited quietly until I looked up again. My voice was raw. "What happens now?" He folded his hands. "We have several options. You can enforce your right to live in the house, recover the funds they misused, or appoint a new trustee." I took a shaky breath. Part of me wanted to walk away from that place forever, but another part knew I couldn't pretend any longer. "I want to face them," I said finally. "I need them to hear this from me." Robert nodded, his expression resolute. "Then we'll set a meeting. You won't be alone in that room." I left the office carrying the folder and the letter pressed close to my chest. The city outside felt different, brighter somehow, like I'd stepped back into my own life. In the car, I set everything on the passenger seat and just sat there breathing. My heart still hurt, but under the ache was something steady. Grandma Agnes had believed in me enough to plan for this moment, to trust I'd find my voice when it mattered most. When I started the engine, my reflection flickered in the rearview mirror. My eyes were red, but there was a fierceness in them I hadn't seen before. I pulled into traffic, the folder safe beside me. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to what they'd done. I was ready to confront it. That night, back at the motel, I spread the trust documents across the bed. Each page felt like a shield I'd never known I had. I read every line, carefully committing the details to memory. The clauses about my right to live in the house, the funds set aside for my work, the clear proof my family had crossed a line. When I finished, I closed the folder and sat in the quiet. My heart was steady in a way it hadn't been since Veronica's message. I picked up my phone and texted Robert. "I'm ready. Let's schedule the meeting," he replied almost immediately. "Tuesday, 10 a.m. I'll be there with you." I set the phone down and leaned back staring at the ceiling. For the first time in weeks, I felt like the person Grandma Agnes always believed I could be. Tuesday morning came cold and bright. I dressed carefully, smoothing my blazer over my shoulders, checking my reflection twice before I left the motel. The drive downtown felt different this time. My fear hadn't vanished, but it wasn't in control anymore. When I reached the office, Robert was waiting by the door. He gave me a steady nod, and together we walked into the conference room. Veronica was already there, sitting rigid beside our parents. They looked up as I entered, their faces tight with something between guilt and defiance. I set the folder on the table without a word. For a moment, no one spoke. The air felt thick enough to choke on. Then Robert cleared his throat. "We're here today to discuss the terms of the Clara Agnes Hayes Trust and the breaches that have occurred." Veronica shifted in her chair, her eyes fixed on the folder, but refusing to meet mine. My mother, Margaret, clasped her hands so tight her knuckles were white. My father stared down at the table. Robert began reading the trust clauses aloud. His voice was calm but unyielding. The right to live in the house, the funds reserved for my work, the clear violations. When he finished, he looked at me. My heart thudded in my chest, but my voice came out steady. "You locked me out," I said softly. "You took what Grandma meant for me, and you pretended it was yours to give or withhold." Veronica's mouth tightened. "We were trying to protect the family," she snapped. I shook my head. "No, you were trying to control me." Silence settled over the table, heavier than any words. My mother finally looked up, her eyes glassy. "Evelyn, we didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered. "We thought you'd come back to your senses." I swallowed hard. "My senses?" I gestured to the folder. "You spent my inheritance. You locked me out of my own home. You erased me." My father's shoulders slumped. He didn't try to deny it. Robert cleared his throat. "Ms. Hayes has prepared a proposal. If you agree, it will resolve this without further legal action." I opened the folder and slid the papers across the table. My voice didn't shake. "I want the trust to purchase a place of my own. I want every transaction monitored by an independent trustee. And after this, I want no further contact." Veronica's jaw clenched, but she didn't argue. My parents stayed silent. It was the first time I'd ever seen them look truly powerless. For a long moment, no one moved. My heart beat slow and steady as they read through every line of the agreement. Veronica's face turned pale. She looked like she wanted to speak, but no words came. My mother wiped her eyes with a shaking hand. My father never lifted his gaze from the table. Robert waited patiently, giving them time. When they finished, he spoke quietly. "You have 48 hours to sign. If you refuse, we will proceed through the court." I stood up, my hands resting flat on the folder. "I'm not asking you to love me," I said. "I'm asking you to respect what Grandma wanted and what I deserve." No one argued. No one apologized. But as I walked out of that room, I felt lighter than I had in years. 2 days later, Robert called me just after sunrise. His voice was calm. They signed everything. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, the morning light spilling across the floor. For a moment, I didn't move. I let the relief wash over me slow and deep. The trust would buy me a place of my own. The rest of the funds would be protected. And there would be no more calls, no more demands, no more pretending. That afternoon, I drove to a small condo on the edge of town, a place filled with light and quiet. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. I carried Grandma Agnes's letter to the empty living room and set it on the windowsill. As I looked around, my chest filled with something I hadn't felt in so long, peace. I had finally come home to myself. 2 days later, Robert called me just after sunrise. His voice was calm. They signed everything. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, the morning light spilling across the floor. For a moment, I didn't move. I let the relief wash over me slow and deep. The trust would buy me a place of my own. The rest of the funds would be protected, and there would be no more calls, no more demands, no more pretending. That afternoon, I drove to a small condo on the edge of town, a place filled with light and quiet. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. I carried Grandma Agnes's letter to the empty living room and set it on the windowsill. As I looked around, my chest filled with something I hadn't felt in so long, peace. I had finally come home to myself.